Father Ted, we are live again. This is Tim Peck. We're here on Project Next Media, where we are trying to bring people together, show what love can be instead of separation, instead of division here in the U.S. We're struggling with a lot of that right now, and today we're going to talk about what to many could be a divisive issue, to some can be more of an issue of unity and love. So the Catholic Church has played a large role in the community and in the conversation of what it is to be LGBTQ. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Chinese bishops and what the Catholic Church is doing about that. Some interesting dynamics there, but we're going to start with the White Sox. So a little bit about baseball, and I'm an enormous baseball fan. And this weekend, White Sox Stadium was filled with Catholics supporting their hometown Pope Leo. So, Father Ted, you want to just give people who haven't seen the show, because I do think we'll probably get a crowd that we don't normally see simply through the title of this, a little introduction of who you are, and then let's jump into baseball, I guess.
Just let me ask you, are you still a Mets fan?
I am a Mets fan. I follow the Reds. Yes, and I've always been a Mets fan. Been, true to myself. They were the best team in baseball. Right now, they're a half game back from the Tigers. So it's the best team in baseball, but they're the best team in the National League. And they've been a big part of my life. I'm trying to make them a big part of my son's life too, who's 2. And this weekend, when we went to go watch them for Father's Day, he said, "Can we watch the Trucks video instead of the Mets?" So that was an interesting bit for me. Yeah.
Well, I think Pope Leo hit a home run when he spoke to the people in the stadium, the White Sox Stadium in Chicago this weekend.
Yeah. Well, introduce yourself, Father Ted, and Uncle Ted, both. For those who don't know, Father Ted is my uncle as well.
So I am the proud uncle of Dr. Tim. I was present when he was born, actually, many years ago, and I'm marrying his brother and priest, and presently at the University of Dayton, serving in campus ministry, retired, but helping out ministry in all kinds of ways. I've been involved in a lot of work, especially for lay groups, developing lay groups. We Marianists have lay groups all around the world, and also have been involved in teaching and and especially in dealing with social justice. So.
Social justice, liberation theology, a little bit there. Traveling the world and working with communities all over, including inner city Cleveland, including beautiful areas in southern Jersey, including Haiti, including Africa. You've been everywhere. So, So let's talk about Pope Leo speaking to people in White Sox Stadium.
Sure. So the people in Chicago wanted to celebrate that one of their own has become the Pope. So they arranged this meeting at the stadium and invited him to come and join in a Zoom talk. So I'm going to read something that he said in that talk. He said, we have to look beyond our own, if you will, egotistical ways. We have to look for ways of coming together and promoting messages of hope. St. Augustine says to us that if we want a world to be better a place, we have to begin with ourselves. We have to begin with our own lives, our own hearts. So basically, he comes from the Augustinians, which is a religious order based on St. Augustine from the 400s. And St. Augustine's main message was that God is a God of love and constantly loving us. And we have to recognize that. And then the message he gave, especially on last Saturday, was we are called to be conscious of that and witness to it, live it out and act, share, come together. Um, so that was his main message. That's constantly his message.
Well, I think that feeds well into what you did last weekend, which is preside over a conference of sorts hosted by the Marius in Chicago uh,
Mhm.
for and with LGBT community. So tell me
Mhm.
how that even happens, how you found
Mhm.
yourself doing that.
Mhm.
Who invited you? How did it come about? Why did you say yes? What did you talk about? There's a lot. There's a lot there.
My religious order has a group called the Marinus Social Justice Collaborative, and it's a group of people who volunteer and who have some people helping them out being paid. But and one of the groups that we work this is LGBTQ persons. So that's been going on for maybe 10 or 15 years. And this past weekend, there was a retreat for anybody that wanted to come. And we had about 35 people. We went to a beautiful retreat house in Chicago. I drove all the way with two others from Dayton to Chicago. And the purpose of the retreat is to help anybody that's LGBTQ, whether transsexual or bisexual or gay or any other sexual related situation. And to tell you the truth, the best part of it was we grouped in small groups. And so I was in a group of about 6 people, and we met about 4 times. And each person shared their experience with either ministering with LGBTQ persons or their own experience of their own sexuality. And in my group, there was someone who comes from the University of Notre Dame. I know him very well, and he works at Notre Dame University with the LGBTQ persons there. And he also works with a group of guys at Notre Dame to help them understand LGBTQ, I guess heterosexual men. Um, so he had a lot of insight of what's happening. And then also in the group was a transsexual person and parent, a parent of someone who was gay. Uh, so
How many people was this group? Can you put us in the room? What kind of room were you in doing this? Was it kind of a classroom style? Was it a circle that you're all sitting in? How does this work?
well, the main group of about 35, we met at times. We had some presentations. That was at a big room, kind of a meeting room. But in the small groups, we went into private rooms and talked. So,
Hmm.
and my role was to be the chaplain. So I, at the end of the week, had the Catholic Mass for everybody. So I had to figure out what was said that weekend, what is going on in people, and how do you help them pray, and how do this issue has become sort of a question in the United States. There's about 50 groups in the Catholic Church that help with this ministry all around the country. There's one particular Jesuit priest, his name is James Martin, and he's kind of the leader of the movement to help of Catholics. And he's had a number of talks with Pope Francis about this. Um, and Pope Francis will not deviate from the Catholic basic doctrine that basically it's man and woman who create marriage. So that's a doctrine. That's a sort of a basis. But Pope Francis wanted to make sure that people are not mistreated, not that they're understood. So this Father Martin speaks a lot about this, and he encourages the ministry. So There's one gentleman I was with this weekend. He thinks like 25% of the population has some sexual differences. Uh, and so it's not like a minor issue. But the difficulty is that people in that minority group are looked down upon and challenged and threatened in all kinds of ways. But the opposite has to happen. You have to be conscious of everybody and conscious of the goodness of people and what they're going through. And then the other thing is we have to understand the biology of what's going on. And that's much more than I understand. But people are born in different ways, and the organs are sometimes, the word I would use is mixed up. And sometimes operations are needed, and then you have all the psychological problems of people, again, young people threatening each other and distancing from each other and challenging each other and all those evil things that happen. And then I've spoken to parents whose children want to be transgender, what do they want to change, and they're deathly afraid that if they have some sort of an operation, it might be too soon, and it's really psychological that they're going through, and not really really a sexual change. And then you have others that claim they're going through some sort of a change that's really enhanced their life, So,
yeah. So
okay.
I mean, you just hit on a lot there. A lot of opinions are going to be said based on what you said, but you are putting this all in the frame and the context of the people that you speak to and what they're struggling with or what they're celebrating. And so appreciate that kind of otherness to the way that you're talking rather than speaking about your own hard opinions in one way or another, because as we all know, those who watch this, you're a learner and open to what you may know or what you don't know. But you also spoke about something that is doctrine in the church, right? Is more about what the church knows or says it knows, right? Is one thing or the other. And I want to hit on that a second, but I also want to say this weekend, it's Pride Month, and part of why we're talking about this, part of why you were at this conference for Catholics. I myself was at Pride here in Southern Indiana in a town called Madison yesterday, and was in Jeffersonville the weekend before, and the team was in Batesville, just small towns and large towns around the district celebrating. And the mood is always very celebratory, right? Very exciting, very happy to be there. But as someone who, and we've talked about this in terms of being a doctor, in terms of being a priest, people confide in you immediately, right? It's also, I also have that same experience being a political candidate, where people will tell you the deepest things that happen in their life. And so when I'm at these Pride festivals, I always have these experiences where people cry to me and they tell me their story right there in public, with people walking around and seeing. And these kind of experiences don't happen where people are this vulnerable in public in most places, but in Pride, it just seems to happen all the time. There's just this acceptance of everyone there is proud, hence the name Pride, but everybody there is also had a shared experience of feeling on the outside, of feeling persecuted, and just thinking about taking yourself out of the equation and thinking about what the other person is going through. That must be hard. That must be so hard to do in this country. And the Catholic Church, as you talked about Pope Francis, and I'm not sure what Pope Leo has really said yet. I know he said a little, but it isn't necessarily said a whole thing. Um, but Francis saying there's a doctrine, and let's talk about what that word, that marriage is between a man and a woman within the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
Does that apply to the belief of the Catholic Church of what America, United States, has the right to do in terms of recognizing that marriage or not? Are those two things different? The Catholic
Mhm.
idea of marriage and the
Mhm.
more secular idea of
Mhm.
marriage.
I want to say basically, the Catholic Church had a very important, many of you would know, a very important council back in the 1960s, Vatican II. And one of the major doctrines or proclamations was that we're free. Human beings are free. So the church does not intend to dominate and tell people what to do. You're free. So that's kind of basic. But at the same time, the church upholds what it believes is the correct morality and the correct spirituality of God loving. So, and this question is all you have to go to the professionals, the doctors or the psychologists or the scientists, and say what is really going on in biology, the human person. And so the church is not going to deny change, that if it is basically seems evident that most human beings are created to be, in marriage, a man and a woman, but other things are going on. So we have to be open to that. What is going on?
Mhm.
Just like Galileo, people didn't want to accept what he said, in the 15th century. And we have to be all open to say, is there a newness here?
Right.
We are free. We have to investigate that.
So this is, a beautiful moment of exploration for the church and the people who are in it. Um, I would like to help people understand, and myself, and I'll seek to understand and help me how the organization of the church can have a doctrine and also the thought of we should evolve, right? I guess this relay the idea of what is a doctrine to the church,
Mhm, mhm,
because
mhm,
there's this infallible type word that we hear of, if it's infallible, it's truth, it's only the truth,
mhm,
versus this evolution. They seem in contrast, and they can't exist together at the same time, or can they? And that's what I'm trying to seek to understand.
mhm. Well, I think you and everybody else in history is trying to understand that reality. Um, and a lot of it is personal. We have to say, well, we have to each find ourselves who we are and what we believe. That's kind of a challenge. And to get back to Pope Leo, he talks about St. Augustine all the time. And St. Augustine said, we're not really, we really haven't found ourselves until we find the absolute love of God present. Um, we live in the constant goodness of God in all kinds of ways, and we
Mhm.
were conscious of that. So the doctrine, there's not very many infallible teachings of the Catholic Church, very few teachings of the infallible church, because we recognize we're part of progress, scientific progress. And also, you have a difficulty. The Catholic Church is like, more than 1 billion people all over the world. And in Africa, homosexual relations is a crime. So how people there are not at the same understanding of what's going on in the West.
Mhm.
So you have to be careful how you speak about these things, that
Yeah.
you guide people. So it's like a constant challenge.
Yeah. So, yeah, you have a lot of different constituents of you, a lot of different people who believe different things, and how do you keep unity while still moving the organization forward. And I'm using that word organization very purposefully, right? Of the church being, as its manifestation here on earth, not and
Mhm.
the organization that it is. There's politics involved, there's people involved, there's leadership involved, there's operations involved. There's a lot of things, and so a lot of
Mhm.
people get frustrated with the pace of change in the
Mhm.
church. But
Mhm.
I think even for myself, when I get frustrated, that especially as a teen, I was very frustrated with that. In the 20s, I've come to understand that, um, especially, having led organizations and whatnot, the change can only be as fast as people are ready to change. And you
Mhm.
can push people, but sometimes that will break people away from you, and then you've lost them and lost the chance to bring them forward with you.
Mhm.
So that is a delicate balance of how hard you push, and at
Mhm.
times being okay when people break away, other times not being so okay. So let's get back to this issue, but it kind of talks about this idea of China being part and people in China being part of the Catholic Church,
Mhm.
and that government being so centralized and um,
Mhm.
dictatorial about what
Mhm.
happens in its country. There's this idea of that the Chinese government wanted certain people to be bishops, whereas there was a faction of certain people in China wanted other people to be bishops. And so you had
Mhm.
this, I don't know if you want to call it a schism or not, but you had these two different groups.
Mhm.
Um, and Pope Leo is trying to unify those two groups. Again, this is really hard stuff to do when you also have uh, free democracy type
Mhm.
governments um,
Mhm.
under your constituency. So, can you talk a little bit about that? I know you're not an expert here, but you certainly
Mhm.
are exposed to this. So, help us understand this issue a little bit.
Okay, so we're going from one topic, one interesting topic to another. Quite a change in topics. So what I know is that there's about 18 million Catholics in China, and there's two churches. One is the church that's open and the underground church. And I know that there, for example, are Jesuits in China who are underground working. And that underground church is strong. So when Francis and the church wanted to be able to appoint the bishops for both churches, because the church didn't want the government appointing the above ground bishops, and then only the church appointing the underground bishops. So Francis tried to do negotiating with the government. Pope Francis, in about some years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, he made this agreement with them, and they agreed to it that the um, the government, I think, and I don't know the details, but the government would propose certain bishops, but then he would have to approve them.
Mhm.
Uh, but what happened was when Pope Francis died, the government went ahead and had a bishop appointed somehow against the agreement. So Francis, the new pope, had to come in right away and say he's going to continue that process. Now, I have a very good friend, a student that graduated from the University of Dayton, and he's Chinese, brilliant person studying in the United States. He's from a Catholic family that is extremely devoted Catholic family. He's the only child, and they work with the marriage encounter movement. And they are openly doing this, and they bring people together and teach them, help them see what marriage is, and they actually give conferences. They live in a city which is sort of open to the church functioning, and the church isn't interfered with, basically because the government wants to have good families, by the way.
Mm.
So
And you're saying that the Catholic the Chinese government.
Yes, the Chinese government
So
permits
where
that.
they dovetail an interest is around making sure that the population booms, because
Right.
there's
Mhm.
a reverse in that happening right now. We're
Yes.
losing
Yeah.
the amount of children being born. Okay.
Yes. So there was one cardinal from Hong Kong who was definitely against what Pope Francis did. He didn't want that to happen at all. But Francis kept trying to find, how do you negotiate with a government like that to get some inroads into it. So um, that's as much as I know right now.
Hmm.
And I think hopefully he was really trying to continue that process. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So no, that's a good intro to what's happening there, because I'm sure there'll be news and change happening there that we should probably follow as we move along. I know this similar issues have happened with the Dalai Lama actually, and um, where China wants to be the one to
Hmm.
appoint and pick which child will become the Dalai Lama, whereas the Tibetan community wants,
Hmm.
obviously, to go along with their customs and
Hmm.
traditions on how to find that person, and the reality of that person. So, yeah, the church seems to be going through similar pieces. I think it's less known because of just the amount of people in China who are Catholic versus followings of the teaching of the Dalai Lama. So it's an super interesting, even political issue. And again, it gets back to this idea of there are so many people within the Catholic Church around the world living under different rules, different laws, including us here in America. And how does the church give respect to individual countries' laws while also maintaining its own views and own teachings? So
Hmm.
super interesting place. You want to say something first about that? Go ahead.
Um, this Pope is very interesting, Pope Leo, and he constantly talks about coexistence. So he said in his homily on Pentecost Sunday, he said, baptism and confirmation united in Jesus' mission is making all things new to the kingdom of God, just as love enables us to sense the presence of a loved one. So tonight, this Feast of Pentecost, we celebrate the odor of the fragrance of Christ in our relationships. This is a mystery. It amazes us, and it leads us to reflect, the Pope said. The concept of being united demands that we each recognize our own poverty and our own riches, that we feel part of a greater whole, apart from which everything withers, even the most original and unique of charisms. All creation exists solely in the form of coexistence, sometimes dangerous, yet always interconnected. The Pope, citing the late Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si, said, and what we call history only takes place in coexistence, living together. However, uh, contentiously, but always together. So he is trying to help us, and all of us recognize the goodness of others, and that we work together. So if you have control systems like the Chinese government has, or even in our government now, if it's becoming a control system, it's destroying that coexistence. And when you're coexisting, you grow enormously. When you're controlled, there's always, because people feel a resistance inside of them. They hate to be controlled. They don't have to be controlled. So um, underneath all of this is a freedom that we are called to have, and the freedom is really from who God is, and what Christ showed us to be. So you take all these issues like sexuality. Well, let us really be open in kindness and find out what's going on, you know. But
Mhm.
that we all have this tendency to say, well, my opinion is right, you know, and then we go to the shadow side of ourselves, you know, the side that I want to control and dominate and be angry from. And then that builds and builds and builds, uh, and it's destructive. So anyway, it's kind of the big picture that I keep thinking of.
Now,
Mm.
in your homily this weekend, you spoke about um, the Trail of Tears uh,
Mm-hmm.
and relocation of American Indians from the southeast to the west, or at least to the Midwest and Oklahoma, etc. So that that time of life where people were being very controlled,
Mm-hmm.
and still a time of slavery where people were being controlled, and then kind of led to this feeling of control by many, which led to a movement that led to the Whigs, led to Abraham Lincoln eventually, only, you know, 35, 40 years later,
Mm-hmm.
and then led to an explosion of those
Mm-hmm.
emotions, of those feelings around
Mm-hmm.
actual civil war, and then resolution of that, um, and compared that a little bit to how people today are feeling controlled or feeling confused, oppressed, whatever it might be. Do you want to touch on
Mm-hmm.
that again? A
I
hard
do,
subject
yeah.
to speak about, and thank you for being so brave to do so.
So what I tried to say in that homily was we have to be witnesses. We have to. Pope, Pope Paul VI, he was the Pope in the beginning of the 1960s, and he said, "Today, modern people will only listen to a teacher if a teacher is a witness. So you'll only really follow someone who's talking if they're witnessing it, if they're living it out." And we all have to be witnesses. You know, we have to figure out am I really living out what I truly believe? So, um, we live in a situation. There's one of we all heard the word social justice, and social justice is that we live together in justice, and together in justice means to say we listen to each other, we work things out together, and you look for the common good, and that happens when everybody is listening to each other and then acting and being involved in expressing what they really believe. So our country has gone through all these stages, you know, from a very beginning. There's been one power structure and then another power structure and another power structure. A good power structure was like when after the Roosevelt sort of democratic positions were held, and then we had Eisenhower. You know, was a change. You go through that. But this question of Jackson, when he was the president, he was like a dictator and tried to control things. And a lot of people followed him. They elected him, you know, and that's how he moved the Native Americans to the west, the Trail of Tears. And then the Whig movement came along, and people began to realize they didn't want to live under that system. You know, they needed a more moderate system, and so it developed.
Mhm.
And you change those movements and systems by people actually uh, getting involved and working together, so that you develop and you don't let the control system, like it's happening all over the world. And that is based on what Pope Leo was saying there, you know, on everybody recognizing their own goodness and sharing it. It's kind of a general statement, but
Mhm.
that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, good stuff. So this idea, yeah, let me just say this idea you've spoken about coexistence, this idea of learning and evolving of who we are comes through coexistence, that the church is open to and is always going to listen to science and
Hmm.
make that progress, that the pace of that progress might be or is slower in the church than in some other places, than here in the United States and the system that we have often. But also the church can be faster than some other places, such as
Hmm.
we have illegality in being LGBTQ in Africa, for example, and it's kind of pacing. It's creating this pace that is a amalgam, is a combination of all these different places that are under its um, that is under its
Hmm.
ability, that are under its, I don't want to use the word rule, what am I looking for,
Hmm.
influence. And so
Influence,
yeah,
influence.
influence,
Yeah.
and that includes China, where you have people who are having an underground church
Hmm.
openly, right? It's a known underground church with a public church, both within the Catholic community, uh,
Hmm.
coexisting there as well. And that underground piece has a lot to do with the Jesuits. You mentioned the Jesuits. I want to do one more piece of history, and then we'll move on and kind of go to the end of today, because we hit some really thorny subjects today. And so, thank you
Hmm.
again for the bravery of doing it. But you spoke about the Jesuits having, being part of that underground movement
Hmm.
in China. In fact, the Jesuits, were the first to sit on the court in China, right, and be there with
Hmm.
the emperor,
Hmm.
um, and practice that coexistence. They are part of this movement within
Hmm.
the church to help evolve it at almost all times. Can you speak to who the Jesuits are and why that's important, or historically?
Well, they have certain Jesuits in China that are formed to be present in the church in China. So I can't say I know an awful lot about it, but um, and how that operates, I don't know. But um, and there's probably all kinds of Christian movements in China that are like a order like the Jesuits operating.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But
so.
they is, yeah, I'm just getting at the fact they as an organization, we can learn more about and talk more about them in
Hmm.
future bits, future shows that we do. We've talked about you being a Marianist, Augustinians,
Hmm.
popes coming from different orders and coming from different, what those orders are, how
Hmm.
they are based off of slightly different teachings or missions within them. I think it just gets to this idea that the church is an amalgam. It is a group of so many different types of views at
Hmm.
once.
Hmm.
And the Pope has a tough job, but a privileged job of bringing those people together, whether they're people
Hmm.
that are living within different orders or people who are living in different countries under different governments,
Hmm.
at different stages of understanding, people who live within all sorts of different groups. And it is constantly evolving, and it evolves at the pace of
Hmm.
incorporating all those different views at once.
There's what is known as in the church a charism. Charism. A charism is if a particular group gets together and they have a certain way of living Christianity, like the Franciscans have the charism of poverty. And that means to say they want to live what it means to be poor as Christians. And so you have all kinds of formation for the priests and the brothers who are Franciscan, or the lay people that are Franciscan organizations, and they meet frequently and they pray together and they study together and they have schools or programs of how to practice Christianity that way. And it's based on recognizing that you're poor and that everything comes from God. It doesn't mean you're living
Yeah.
without having enough to eat, or but you let that power of God operate primarily, and so that charism has just spread all over the world.
And you spoke about this charism within the United States around the LGBTQ community. There are about 50 groups within the Catholic Church, within America,
Right.
within the United States of America, that address this issue. They address the needs of this community, address the idea of exploration and learning on behalf of the church. We also have spoken in earlier episodes around the synod, around this idea of how the church has asked all of its bishops to learn from their
Mhm.
lay people. This
Mhm.
learning experience is happening in the church, which I love shedding light on for those who might not be aware of it. How did the Marianist community decide to be part of this learning process when it comes to LGBTQ people?
So the Marianist charism is a charism based on Mary, the Blessed Mother, but also on community. So we realize that you only will develop growth if you work together in a community. You have to have people working with. So the Marianist brothers and priests live together, the sisters live together, the lay communities work together, and that started from the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, the church was decimated in France, and the founder of the Marianist community, Chaminade, didn't want to go to a parish, the old sort of the traditional way of being. He wanted to start communities. So he did. He went and got young people, young adults, and brought them together. And they developed in the communities of older people and younger people and women. And then that grew into various communities. And then they started each to develop schools. That was the first method they developed. Well, today, we're trying to help communities that would help the LGBTQ people, or to help the environment, or to help the question of helping the immigrants. We have a committee for that. So, it takes people, it takes a group together to come and find how you do this together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the Marianist charism. And
That's right.
Mary is the one because she was like open totally to what Christ, her son, her openness. She didn't have any, control systems, or she was just so close to Christ she could live that way. And that we're all called to live that way. How can we really be open and not egotistical in our thinking? It's like an aim we all have, like Mary had.
All right.
So,
Well, we hit on a lot of things today, Uncle Ted. Let's
yeah.
move on for today. We'll get back together again next week. But I do want to leave us on this idea of coexistence,
Mhm.
and as my position here in Indiana as a political candidate in many ways just is about coexistence, right? Is about
Mhm.
trying to
Mhm.
represent everybody and trying to understand what everybody's views are and how do you bring those forward in order to
Mhm.
give justice for all. So uh, this idea of coexistence and learning through how the church is dealing with it
Mhm.
is an important lesson. So thank you for
Mhm.
it. Thank you for educating us, and thank you for being educated. I think
Yes.
that shows a lot that you would
Mhm.
go and just expose yourself to such a hard topics and go right toward the belly of the hard topics instead
Mm.
of running from them.
Yeah, but I can't. But I so profoundly believe that what you're doing is like what we all have to do, whether no matter what political party we're in. We really have to find out how we live with each other well and get to know each other. Keep it up, Dr. Tim.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Thank you to everyone who watches this. It's incredibly important to explore
Mhm.
these communities, to explore these ideas with
Mhm.
openness, and be in a place where we don't always think we're right and wait for a place for us to say what we think, but to step back and listen. So have a great week. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Blessings. Keep having fun and all.